Welcome to another edition of the Latino Paradox. I want to thank those of you who have been watching and sending in your comments. We appreciate the likes. Would like to hear more about your thoughts about what we're talking about. This week's topic is the whole incident, the absolutely horrific incident in Las Vegas. And so our first question is, how did we get here, Ruben, in your opinion? How did we get to this situation of this absolute horrific situation in Las Vegas?
Again, yes, thanks, Arnold. You have, again, 59 people dead, over 527 people wounded, injured. They'll be dealing with those scars for many years. How we got to this situation, to this point, it was a variety of things. It was an overall callousness of our society that allows people to treat their fellow human beings this way. It was a proliferation of guns to the point where you have as many guns in the United States as you have inhabitants of the United States. It was a failure to keep track of the number of guns that people buy, and this broken mentality. You can buy an unlimited number of even high-powered killing machines. You can spend $100,000 on guns, and nobody will say anything about it or keep track of it. And lastly, we got here because in a society that allows itself to profile Mexicans along the border, Muslim Americans at airports, and African Americans motorists on freeways, under the guise of good law enforcement, we have somehow missed a really important demographic, and that is alienated white males who stockpile tons of high-powered weapons. We should be keeping track of those folks. We haven't been. It's part of how we got here.
Well, there's a side of me that could agree with a lot of the things you've said, and then there's a side of me that has gotten to this point of where we've gotten, how we've got to where we're at. I don't think there's any way of identifying people that do these types of things. I don't know if we could ever profile them. We're having problems profiling this guy. FBI profilers couldn't have anticipated this guy in a million years. I think that we're in this situation because we are dealing with a culture war, and so many of the people that are part of the belief in guns, really, it's not just about the gun. It's a lot bigger than that. It's a very divided society, and guns, the possession of guns, doesn't mean just having a gun to protect yourself. It means almost a throwback to another era of how this country looked at itself and looked at each other and individually. So I think it's way beyond the ability just to control the acquisition of guns. I have actually come to the position that if people want to kill, they'll figure out a way to do it. And there's people that will take advantage of that. You notice the bump thing on the new gun, they're going off the shelf like crazy.
Right. So
every time there's a killing of this nature, there is greater gun sales, and there are more laws that are passed in Republican states to allow the use of guns. It's happened with Trayvon Martin. It's happened with virtually every major incident of this nature. Democratic states don't pass any more laws, pretty much stays the same. So we're at a very, very, very hard time. Our next question is, what are we doing wrong?
I think one of the things we're doing wrong is we're taking a complicated issue and trying to oversimplify it in terms of the politics of it. I think, for instance, if it comes out that the shooter, Stephen Paddock, if it comes out, he targeted this group because they were mostly conservative country music fans, Trump supporters. There was a story out about him looking at Chicago as a possible venue,
right,
and some conversation that perhaps he didn't focus on Chicago because he thought there'd be more Trump voters at this venue in Las Vegas. If it comes out that this is true, we have a really ugly, a whole different kind of ugliness. We have something similar to what happened with Stephen Scalise, the Republican congressman who was shot during baseball practice,
right,
by a shooter who asked a passerby, now there's two groups of congressmen out there practicing. Which ones are the Democrats and which ones are the Republicans? The fact that the shooter targeted the Republicans, one of the things we're doing wrong is we're taking, I think, this complicated idea and oversimplifying it in terms of the gun problem and the solution, and it's become overly political. And the degree to which politics has become involved is the degree to which things get very cloudy. And this particular shooter, if he's guided by politics, clearly that's one of the things we did wrong, is our over-politicizing of our society.
Well, I think we have to look at the fact that there are more gun clubs and gun shops than there are McDonald's, to quote an article that came out in the New York Times. Can you imagine that? There are more gun clubs than there are McDonald's in the United States of America. I think that we're completely approaching this very, very wrong. I used to firmly believe in the issue of controlling the weapons. Perhaps I continue to believe to a certain extent about that. But I think this is a much larger malignancy in American culture today. It's a it's a much bigger problem, the possession of a gun. We're never going to stop the possession of a gun. It is it's part of our DNA as a country.
Part of our Constitution.
But I don't know what we can do about what motivates people to use these guns to turn around and create and do such absolute harm and massacres. So I think that, as you said, a good point about politicizing. I think we've got to step back from politicizing this issue, because it is much more of a serious problem with the DNA of American society today. We've never had this happen in our society, as we've seen in the last 30 years. It gets worse almost every time, and we keep thinking it can't get any worse. Well, it keeps getting worse. So I think that we have to approach it from a very completely different situation. And I don't know if we're capable of doing that, because you have the polemics of this issue, and both sides are phenomenally entrenched. We're not being successful in convincing the gun rights people to move in any direction. Taking out that bumps kit is not going to stop these types of killings. These things have not been used in the manner that they were used this time. Previously, right. Other weapons were used. So, I just don't. I think we're going down the wrong path. Our last question.
Well, to your point, just to finish up on the bump stock, they're stocking up on the bump stocks because
exactly.
They know they're about to be outlawed.
That's my point.
So they're stocking up. So they're stocking up on something they know is about to become more difficult to get. And exactly. So because of that, these people are saying that they intend to use these bump stocks in the future in an illegal way.
I don't know. I don't know if they're saying that, Ruben. I think this is what it goes back to. The problem that we're having.
And put it on the shelf.
It goes to the point that even after this happened, right. You have more people buying a kit, an instrument that allowed that to happen. It isn't the reverse. Right. It isn't that they're protesting. Actual gun rights people are going in there and saying, you know what, we don't want this. This really infringes on our rights to own a gun.
I agree,
it's
but
the opposite.
I agree, but they're doing it, as I said, because they're about to be outlawed, which tells you, if you buy one of these things today, okay, and you know they're about to be outlawed, you're trying to get them before they're outlawed. That tells me that at some point you intend to do something illegal. You intend in the future. I'm not talking about. Listen, I'm not talking about another massacre. I'm talking about something simple. If you have a device that's about to be illegal and you buy it, you're about to be in possession of an illegal substance, of an object.
Well, it'll be viewed, Ruben, I guarantee you, anybody who buys that gun will not be told that they're in possession of anything illegal. What they will be told is that if you buy anything after the time we pass a law, it is illegal after that, but you'll be grandfathered in. That's going to be probably the kind of law that we look at doing. What is, I guess we wanted to change this. This is a very important thing. Yeah. What is the one takeaway that our community as Latinos can take from what's happened in Las Vegas?
I think the takeaway, the main point is there has to be a balancing of our rights. That this debate cannot be like the immigration debate or the abortion debate or so many debates that end up being dominated by the extremes. There needs to be a place in the sensible center for folks who support the Second Amendment and think that the new imperative is not just to have guns in your house to protect in case you need to start up a militia, as the Second Amendment says, but rather to protect your family. That there are many stories of people who have saved their lives, saved the lives of their children, because they had a weapon to use in their home. And those are great stories. It was a story I read of a young woman with her baby at home alone. And two men broke into the house. And she went into the closet to hide, and she's got her and her baby. And there's no phone, and there's no 911, and there's no police. Okay? and they come through the door, and she has a gun in the closet, and she shoots and blows them away. I love stories like that. I love stories with a happy ending, okay? Because that story could have gone very differently. You could have been reading a different headline had the gun not been there. So the Second Amendment is important. On the other hand, it is perfectly proper, as we do with abortions and other things, to regulate these things, to call for background checks and more waiting periods and more attempts to keep them out of the hands of people who are mentally ill. And as I said, to put a limit, I've never heard this said before, but it needs to be said, to put a limit on the number of guns you can buy. That just because you have the right to bear arms doesn't mean you have the right to buy 20, 30, 50 guns. I grew up around guns. I grew up in the Central Valley in farm country. Guns were part of my childhood. I grew up the son of a cop with guns in the house. My father, who was a law enforcement officer, never owned 50 guns at one time. 50 is a big number. And the very fact that somebody could do that and government not know about it is the problem. So there has to be this sensible center, this middle ground that we find where you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. People get to keep their guns, but we also get to keep our sanity.
Well, I think the takeaway for our community is that because our community is growing and continues to grow, I think we have to come to the realization that that growth, our presence here, is in fact moving some of the people who own guns to own more guns. And they're afraid of things, and they manifest it by buying more guns. It's a statement that is being made. So rather than go down this path that we constantly go, which is to demand more control of guns, I think the question now becomes to ask those that own the guns, that are members of gun shops and gun stores and gun clubs, what do you propose that we do to deal with this problem of such an escalation? What is it that you see America doing, if not through government, then through us as a society? We've never asked that of one another. The gun clubs are phenomenally well organized, as opposed to the gun control groups. Their membership is extensive. It's unbelievable what they attract to their annual convention in the NRA. But now the question, I think, has to be to them. You want to own a gun? Okay, what do you propose that we do as a society? And I think that's how we have to approach it. But to constantly get into this headbutting, all the gun control laws that we have in the United States of America have not stopped these things from happening.
Absolutely.
And we cannot ignore that fact any longer.
That's right.
So, again, thank you so much for tuning in to our Latino Paradox. It's topics that are really quite gripping for American society. We hope that you'll stay tuned for future ones, and we thank you for watching this one.